What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Embers. We have a very special guest with us. Many of you listeners probably don't know who it is. It's Bob Smiley. So we're very fortunate to have him on. Well-known comedian, and I can let him introduce himself a bit more because I don't want to take away from that by any means, but just
No, you're
very
doing a great job. Go ahead.
yeah, right. He says keep going. But yeah. So I guess to just dabble in, we'll just kind of get going. So how did you get in the line of work of, like, I guess, comedian and that type of, and also what made you lean into a Christian format? I feel like that's kind of an obscurity or a rare thing to see.
Okay, yeah, great questions. I'm going to answer the second one first and the first one second. And people with dyslexia will appreciate that. So the second one was the Christian part. So comedians, they write about their life. I mean, obviously we all have bits about Snuggies and, weird stuff. But for the most part, comedians try to find their voice. So the first couple of years that you're on stage, you're really trying to find your voice, is what we call it, which means your stage presence, how you talk, what kind of quote unquote character you're going to be. And so if you're writing about your life and you're trying to have your authentic voice, you're going to end up writing about what's you're most passionate about in life. And so I have been a Christian pretty much all my life. So it was kind of a natural progression of when I started getting on stage, that's what people are going to hear about. I'm not just going up there being a preacher. Like, I still have to have laughs per minute and all that stuff. But people are going to know they're going to get a clean show.
Mm.
I'm going to have stories about growing up and being in church and my parents being Christian and stuff like that. So it was uh it was pretty easy to, when I first got in this, to just keep it clean and make it, kind of about Christ. And so yeah, I never was like, I want to be a club comic, or I wish I uh, could put a cuss word in here to use it as a crutch to get a laugh where a joke is kind of weak or anything like that. I literally was just like, yeah, put me on stage and I'm going to make you laugh, but I'm also going to give you some encouragement. And that was kind of my goal from the very beginning. So now to answer your first question, and this kind of, I'm going to answer this question as well. It's going to cover the second one. Is how I got into it does kind of answer the whole reason why I decided to make it all about God. I was never pursuing comedy. It was never a goal of mine. I first of all, I didn't know there was such thing as a Christian comedian. I didn't know churches had comedians in for shows. So I thought the only way that a comedian would get stage time was at bars or comedy clubs, or every once in a while, if you're good enough, you get on TV. But for the most part, you're playing nightclubs and you're playing all these places that I didn't hang out in, didn't want to be in. So being a comedian was never a goal of mine. So I was going to be a teacher, and my whole life plan was to be a teacher and then a principal and then a superintendent. That I'd mapped out my entire life. And
Hmm.
my junior year in college, they had a stand-up competition, and first prize was $500, which was, like, at the time, like 8 months rent for out in Abilene, Texas. It actually is probably still 8 months rent out there. The rent is pretty low. Um, I love Abilene. It's You guys should drive out there and look at the tree. So they uh, they had this competition, and I decided to sign up. And all through my life, people were telling me that I was funny, and I loved using humor. Like, I definitely was always the funny kid in class, and voted class clown and all that kind of stuff all throughout school. But never thought it'd be a career. I recognize humor as something like a gift that God has given us. And I really wanted to tap in to figure out how to give that gift to as many people as possible in my everyday life. Like, I just enjoyed being funny. But this stand-up competition had a cash prize, and I was like, I'm gonna do it. And so I did it. I won, not because I was even good. Everybody else was terrible. They were so bad. Um, That's how I met Tim Hawkins. No, that's not true at all. That's totally not true.
Could have fooled
That
us.
that'd be so great. Everybody else was terrible, and I met Tim there that night. No, everybody just really was not. I mean, none of us were comedians. We were all college kids, and I won, and I thought, what a great experience. You know, I'll be. I literally, when they were giving me the money, I had a thought. I'm going to be able to tell my grandkids that I once won a stand-up competition. And I thought that would be the coolest thing to tell my grandkids. Like, you know, your old pappy, you know, he did a stand up competition one time. I did stand up one time. That's what I thought I'd be telling my grandkids. So, anyway, uh, won the contest, graduated. Before I became a teacher, I wanted to see what it was like to actually make money. And since teachers don't get paid money or what they're worth, I took a job as a photographer in Dallas. I'd been working for this photographer during the summers to make some money for the school year, and he wanted to hire me full time. And so I moved to Dallas, Texas. I did photography for a year, and when I was trying to look at where I was going to start teaching, um, I got a. What I'm about to say is going to make me sound super old. My pager went off, and do you guys know what a pager is?
I've heard of it.
Okay.
That probably made you sound even older. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. I made that kind of money back then, so I had a pager, and I literally was driving to a photo shoot on 635 in Dallas, and my pager went off. I pulled over at a Cracker Barrel payphone. Man, everything about this story is super old. I pulled over to a payphone. I faxed the guy. I got out my Rubik's Cube. I went to Blockbuster, checked out a VHS tape. Yeah, how old can I make this story? No, I pulled over to Cracker Barrel payphone, and I called the number, and it was actually a kid that I had hung out with. We I was dating this girl, and her roommate was dating this guy. And this guy and we hung out, you know, a little bit, but we didn't really like know each other that well. He called me and he was like, "Hey, is this Bob Smiley?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Man, I went out to Nashville, and he originally was going to be a singer, but then he got into the business and he started managing and road managing and kind of doing that with acts and stuff. And he was about to road manage a guy named Clay Cross, this adult contemporary Christian singer, and he was like, "Yeah, we're leaving for tour in 2 weeks," and we just had a meeting. And Clay Cross said that it would be fun to have a comedian come out and entertain the crowd in between. There were three music acts on this tour, and so this kid was like, "Hey, I saw this guy do a stand up competition my junior year, and I thought he was really good. So let me see if I can track him down and see what he's doing." And so he tracked me down. In fact, this is how he got my number. He called Abilene Christian, and you know how colleges keep your number so they can ask you for money later on, you know,
Yeah.
throughout your entire
Mhm.
life. They just gave him. They had my pager number, which I don't know how they got that, but they had that, and they just gave it to him. Which nowadays you couldn't do that, but you know you'd get sued, you'd get in trouble if you know you found that out. But back then they were just like, "Oh, Smiley, yeah, here it is, you know, 214," and just gave it to him. And I'm kind of thankful they did, because he was like, "I don't know what you're doing, but we leave for tour in 2 weeks." And I was like, "Well, how long's the tour?" And he was like, "Well, it's 6 weeks, but Clay Cross just won new artist of the year, so it's the tour's probably going to get extended. Do you want to go on tour with us?" And I literally was just standing at a Cracker Barrel payphone, and I was like, "Okay." Like, I was so nonchalant. I had no idea it was about to change my life, because in my mind, I was thinking, I'll go out and they'll fire me within a week, you know, for impersonating a comedian, you know, because I wasn't a comedian. And I thought, but I'll get on a tour bus. And I thought that was the coolest thing. I thought, I'll actually get, you know, I felt like I could make it a week before getting fired. And so I was like, I'm going to get a week on a tour bus. And I grew up in a town with 281 people in it. I grew up this little redneck kid. And so the idea of getting on a tour bus and going out just seemed so surreal to me. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And so I flew to Nashville. I remember it was $99, a huge investment for me at the time. I booked a one-way Southwest airline flight to Nashville, got off the plane and got on a tour bus and went out as a comedian. And at that time, I'd done stand up 3 times in my entire life.
What did
And
your, family think of all this, like, at the time? Like, did you share with them or
yeah, yeah. So, my mom retired as a principal, and my dad retired as a superintendent. I had planned on following their footsteps. My whole family knows that education is very important. My dad taught me that, there's a lot of kids growing up without positive male role models. And so being in education as a guy, you have a huge ministry of being a positive male influence to kids who maybe
mm,
don't have a dad and stuff. And so, um, yeah, I was just all on board, and this is my life's plan. And so I really, like, I rehearsed my speech to tell them, hey, I'm going to go out and, try this thing. I didn't think it would last, but I was even nervous about just telling them I'm going to go out on this tour and just see what happens. I really thought I would hit some pushback, and I didn't at all. Both my parents were so supportive, and they were like, no way. And I was like, yeah, isn't that crazy? And my dad goes, yeah, they'll fire you in a week. So we were both in the same mindset. Um, but he was like, what a great experience. And so they were very, very supportive. And so I went out to Nashville and went out on that tour. Clay Cross and I became really good friends. And so he asked me to stay on and do his summer dates. And so I started traveling with him. So at that point, I actually got an apartment in Nashville with the mentality of, okay, I signed a 6-month lease. That's how confident I was in my comedy career at the time. I signed a whole 6-month lease, and I thought, even once Clay realizes I'm not really that good, then I'll stay around Nashville and maybe work at a coffee shop or something, and then move back to Texas and start teaching. And so I went out, did those summer dates, and that's when the Newsboys, Christian rock band, the Newsboys, saw me, and they
Yeah.
were like, "Do you want to go on tour with us in the fall?" And again, I grew up way out in the country. I didn't listen to any music, much less we didn't get Christian music. So I didn't know anything about the Christian music industry. And I grew up Church of Christ. So we didn't listen to anything except a cappella music, at church and stuff. So I
Right.
didn't know any of these bands. But Peter Furler just was a super cool dude. And he and Phil Joel were like, like, man, it'll be fun. Come out and you can, do stand up in between the acts. And they had to hire a merch guy. And so they were like, we can actually pay you if you do the merch. But we're really kind of hiring you because we want you on stage and keeping the show moving, but keeping the, crowd entertained and stuff. And I said yes, and I didn't even know how big they were. And I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll extend my lease and stay out here a little bit longer. And then I went to uh, golly, man, everything about my life is old now. I went to a Tower Records. Do you guys even know what that is?
I would
Can't say I've
record
heard of it.
store, I would assume, but
Wow, somebody is a Sherlock Holmes. That's good. Yeah. Yeah. Tower Records is a record store. How great would it be if it was like a bagel shop and be like, no, you're
Yeah.
totally wrong. No, it was a record. So I went in there and I started looking up Newsboy stuff, and I realized, like, oh, this band is legit. And so then, I had I think I had a month and a half before the tour started. And then I went out on the Take Me to Your Leader tour, was the tour. And the opening act was Third Day, which is another huge band in Christian music, and the Newsboys. So it turned out to be the number one Christian tour that year, the Take Me to Your Leader tour, as far as ticket sales and people. So now this little farm kid who grew up, was 17 in his graduating class. Now I'm standing in front of like 4,000 people a night, and and telling my little dumb jokes and making people laugh. And so that was kind of whenever I started thinking like, oh, maybe God put me here. Like,
Mm,
because it's such a weird story. This is not how you do, that's not how you get into comedy. You know, you start out at open mic nights and you work hard and you try to get 5 minutes and then you try to get 10 and you take every single, junior high lock in at 4 a.m., right after the shaving cream fight. You get up and do a set and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't even pursuing comedy, and all of a sudden, God just kind of opened the doors and almost kind of kicked me through it. And so I did the Clay Cross tour, and then I was like, "All right, now I'll go back home and continue with my plans." And then God was like, "No, no, no. Here's the Newsboys. Go on this tour." And so I did that, and then I was like, "Okay, I'm probably done now." And then a band called the Supertones asked me to tour with them uh, after the Newsboys tour, and like for the first 3.5 years, I just stayed out on tour with bands that just liked having me around, and like the different element that I would bring to their shows, with comedy.
That's cool. So what was your I guess like your relationship with God like in the midst of all this? Like how did you balance all of like the touring with, maybe personal time with God, maybe going to church? Like was that difficult for you? Like in all of that
No, no,
traveling?
my relationship, that's a great question, but my relationship with God was in awe. Like every single city that we would pull into, I literally would be like, I never had the mentality that I was there because on my own merit. I was never thinking I'm here because I'm good. Like
right.
every time I would step off a tour bus, I'd be like, wow, God brought me here. This is
Mm,
amazing. So yeah, I never really had that kind of struggle of, the ego taking over, or, thing, because there's always going to be comedians that are better than you and always going to be comedians that are worse than you. So the whole ego thing, I'm just happy to be listed in a list of comedians. But the fact that God thought, or I guess he God gave me the talent to be able to do what I do. And then when I didn't recognize it right away, for him to actually place me in it, yeah, I was just in awe the whole time. And I found a really good church in Nashville that I got connected to pretty quickly, and made some good friends. And yeah, and I was traveling around with guys that really were in it for the right reason. Back then, the Newsboys, Jody Davis, Jeff Frankenstein, Phil Joel, Duncan Phillips, all those guys, man, they were always in the Word. They were always reading the Bible. They brought a pastor out to do devotions. So you didn't go a day without talking to God and praising God and thanking God. And then you close the night out with basically, I mean, yeah, it was rock shows, but it was rock shows trying to point people to God.
mm.
So it was, yeah, the road was actually easy to kind of stay on fire for him.
That's really good. So you mentioned how people you grew up and people were always telling you you were funny growing up, but I imagine that was more like freestyle, like you would crack a joke or say something and people would laugh. So what was I guess the initial hurdles with like making like an actual stand-up comedy set, like writing out like a whole list of jokes? So I imagine it's not as simple as like writing jokes. You kind of have to also practice and probably improvise in the
Or
in the
yeah,
middle.
feel out the
Yeah.
crowd or
Yeah. Well, a couple of things happened. One, Clay Cross, they decided to bring out these brand new moving lights, and they were, I guess, maybe bought them at Dollar General. I don't know where they got them, but it was not a high class, place, because the moving lights kept breaking. And so every time they would break, which was almost every single night at some point during the concert, they would, when something breaks and they can't sing, they're going to bring the circus monkey up to start dancing for them. So they'd always be like, "Bob, go up and do some time." And so I would just go up, and I had about 10 to 15 minutes of comedy material at the time on that first tour. And so that taught me, it taught me that when you're rolling in to the town, be looking and see, what does the town have? Does it have a Dollar General? Does it have a Walmart? Does it have anything that you can make jokes about? Or, even just kind of talking to the people while you get to the venue and set up, like, what draws people here? Like, what are the jobs that, and then just try to have some jokes for that. So that was a good learning experience. And then my dad is one of the funniest guys I've ever known. Like, he is just incredibly funny. And so I used to watch him hold court in any room that he was in. Like, he would walk in and just start making people laugh. And he was a superintendent of my school, so he would make a lot of speeches, and any school assembly, he was always getting up and doing, and just constantly making people laugh doing that. And so I got to watch that, and so I kind of learned the structure of comedy. I learned all the things that I know what the labels are now. I didn't know what the labels were, but I knew the rule of three. I knew the pause before the punchline. I'd learned all that stuff before I even knew that it was an actual thing, by watching my dad. And then my dad and I liked watching comedians. So if there was a comedian on Johnny Carson, my dad would actually let me stay up late and watch. And then sometime during high school, stand-up comedy went huge. And so there were a lot of shows that showcased stand-up comedians. And so I would devour those, not because I thought I was going to do it, but because I literally just loved stand-up comedy. I just loved, watching these guys stand up there by themselves and make people laugh. I was fascinated by it. So I really was taking myself to school early on in my life, not realizing that I was taking myself to school. I thought I was just enjoying watching Gary Shandling on TV, but I literally was in my mind logging how he did that and how he was funny. And so when I got on stage, like, I just kind of already knew some of the tricks of the trade just because I'd been watching it for so long.
So, I when you approached, I think you said like 4,000 people, um, you know, trying to prepping yourself for that situation, did nerves or anything? It seems like you have like a overwhelming amount of confidence or comfortability. Like, were you, I mean, like you just walked up there for 10, 15 minutes. Like, did you ever, I don't know, like just
Every
word bomb
night,
it, you know what I mean? Like,
every single night, I needed to have a change of pants ready at any time. Like, so yeah, you kind of learn little tricks like that too. No, especially with the newsboys, and they were such like cheerleaders of mine. Like, I don't know why they liked me so much, but they always would try to give me extra time, or just be very supportive. One of the stops, we did a festival, and so the newsboys were obviously headlining, and the promoter of the festival was like, "So you do stand up, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Well, do you want to do a set? We've got a tent over the side." And at the time, like, I wasn't convinced that I was a comedian, but I was going to take, any opportunity that God gave me. And so I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "All right, it's a 30-minute set, and it's like at 1 p.m. or something like that." And so I was like, okay. And so I'm on the tour bus, and I'm like writing jokes like as fast as I can to hopefully have 30 minutes of stuff. And so I went over to the tent, and they introduced me, and I got up and started doing my thing. And I looked up, and Phil Joel, who was the bass player for the Newsboys, he and his wife Heather were in the back of the tent. Like, thankfully nobody saw him, or they would, nobody would listen to me, but they actually came out to see me, like to support me and stuff. And so uh most of my confidence was just because those guys were so, they were confident for me.
Okay.
But every single night right before I'd go on stage, I would be like, what am I doing? I'm not funny. I don't know how to do this. Like, I had all that self doubt. But I had to keep reminding myself, like, I wasn't pursuing this. God put me here. So if God
Mm,
wants me here, now I will still do the work. Like, I'm going to write every day. I'm going to do everything I can to do my best. But ultimately, I was like, if I don't make it, then at least I tried, and I feel like
Amen.
God just put me there And if he, and I also kind of thought, well, maybe he's just putting me here for a time. And then when my time is up, it'll be time to go, And so I kind of, that kind of calmed me down a little bit, not realizing like, oh, this has to work, or this, I'd be like, hey, I'm here because God put me here. And that, I guess that's where my confidence, nobody's ever asked me that. So I'm actually kind of realizing that as I'm telling you guys. Yeah, most of my confidence was because, like, yeah, God opened the door, and I was like, okay, we'll see how long this lasts. And weird stuff would happen too. So I did the Newsboys tour, that I did a tour with Plank Eye, the Supertones, and then I feel like I did one other tour, and then and I started getting booked at youth groups, and so I was kind of doing a few of my own shows, and I bought a little starter house in Nashville, and so I was living there, and then all of a sudden the shows dried up, and I had 3 shows all of a spring, and we had just had our first kid, so I'm like the provider of the family, and I had 3 shows for like 4 months. And so I was going to go get a job. Um, there was a there was a warehouse in Nashville that made banners, and so I knew one of the guys that worked there, and so I said, "Hey, man, I need a job, because I don't, like the comedy thing's drying up." And so my plan was to get a job making banners in a warehouse until I'd finished out those shows for the spring, and then we were going to look at moving back to Texas, to be back here. And I thought, well, I'll start teaching again. And so the guy got me an interview, and the day I was leaving to go do the interview to work in a, sweaty warehouse to make banners, so I could provide for my, newborn baby and my family. As I was walking out, the phone rang, and it was the Newsboys, and they were like, "Hey, how's your spring look?" And I was like, "Well, I don't want to brag, guys, but I got 3 shows." Then they were like, "Yeah, we've got 67 shows. Do you want to
Oh,
tour with us again?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so I went out and did the Love Liberty Disco tour with them. But it literally was up until that day, when I thought I was done and I was going to get a job working in a warehouse. And I feel like God was, I think 2 things were happening that day. One, God wanted to make sure that sorry guys, man, I'm getting over a cold. Um, I think he was trying to tell me, like, he was trying to see that comedy wasn't becoming like replacing any time with him. Like, I wasn't now more in love with comedy than I was in love with God. And so I was fine with that. I'd work in a warehouse, and I felt like that was uh, a a stepping point of like coming to a crossroads, and I was fine to go down whatever path God wanted me to go on, whether it was comedy or whether it was just working, 9 to 5 or whatever it was. And I felt like that was a good growing period, that God allowed me to go through. But then I also think that that day happened just as a reminder of God going, "No, no, I got you. We're going to move you over here now." And so, yeah, went out and did that tour, and yeah, it just kept getting good.
yeah. I think it's beautiful hearing about your humility before God in the midst of all the doors he was opening. So, as like a Christian-based comedian, interjecting jokes, like Christian-based jokes. Um, were there ever any times where you might have written the joke and you might have thought, I hope the audience doesn't get offended by it? Like, like if it's like a Christian audience, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there I've been doing this so long that I'm gonna offend somebody. Like, it's just, you can't not, especially nowadays. Back then it was more difficult because I would show up and nobody knew who I was. And so the crowd would come in and, almost have their arms folded and be like, "All right, let's see you make me laugh, but we're kind of expecting you to
Like,
offend us."
yeah, almost like
Yeah.
it's a challenge to not laugh.
Yeah, yeah. And so that was the struggle back then. Now I really don't even care anymore because, like, I'm proud of the stuff that I do, and the stuff that I would do in front of my family. I would do it in front of my friends. Like I don't the stuff that I write is not offensive to me, but I think everybody is, yeah, especially the last like 4 or 5 years, everybody kind of is showing up looking to be offended about something. So if you say anything political or anything about stuff that's in the news or the fake news or like anything, you're gonna offend some people in the crowd. And so I've just kind of decided not to worry about it and just do my stuff. But um yeah, early on, especially whenever you're getting booked to do an hour show and you really only have 45 minutes, it was real tempting to try stuff that was a little over the line. And every once in a while, I would offend somebody you know, I remember I had a joke. I was telling this story, and it was based on a true story of me getting the flu in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and I don't even remember where in this bit the joke went, but uh, I think I described the doctor that came in to examine me, and it was like totally cut arms, obviously probably a triathlon runner, real thick beard. Her name was Julie. That was the joke. And oh man, I hadn't thought about this in a long time. I was doing that bit at a festival, and all of a sudden, I hear this groan, and I look down, and there's a lady who has a beard. And this was, in like 2003. So it wasn't a weird thing going on. It was like literally she had some probably hormone growth problems or something, and she booed me the rest of the time, like just like. But I'm like, that's a pretty good joke, and how would I know that there would be actually a lady there that had a beard? Like it's such a weird situation. But yeah, I had that happen. I used to do a joke where I talk about the town that I grew up in. Uh, Only had 281 people, and I would say it was very small. Our idea of a large industrial company was a 200-pound Avon lady, which again, I'm going to stand. That's a good joke. That's a really good joke. And I was doing a show and I said that, and again, uh, I hear some groans from the crowd, and I look, and there's a very large woman, and she's wearing I think it was the 100th year celebration of Avon shirt on. So it's almost like I spoke that person into existence so she could be offended at me at that show. I'd been telling that joke for like a year and a half, never had a problem, always a killer laugh. And then all of a sudden, there happens to be a large woman with an Avon shirt at the show. And, that kind of stuff. So you really never know, when and where and all that.
Yeah.
You guys
So
get quiet like you're writing notes and stuff.
no, we're just taking it all in.
Yeah, we're soaking it up. I promise.
Yeah, so
You're looking at the embers burning and not listening to me is what I feel like.
yeah, we're sitting around the fireplace.
Exactly.
Yeah, so how are there any like when you read the Bible, do you find there to be a lot of humor in it? Like, are you ever just like sitting back reading the Bible and you like, I don't know, read something that Jesus or someone says and you just get a good laugh from it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've done lots of bits. My friends have done lots of bits about the comedy and um, in the Bible. One of my favorite ones, my buddy Tim Hawkins does, is he talks about how he's got a good wife and not everybody has a good wife, and he's like, Job didn't have a good wife because Satan showed up and was like, let's tempt him, let's take away his kids, let's take away his cattle, let's take away his land, let's take away everything, and then he'll curse God and die. But he never took his wife away. And so what does that say about that? And I mean, and the first time I read Job, like I actually had that thought. I was like, oh, she must have been a real like nag.
Yeah.
That Satan was like, yeah, I'm not touching her. I do a bit, I don't do it anymore, but I used to do a bit about because this actually happened. I tell people to find out what their kids are reading in the Bible before you do certain activities. Because I once took my oldest son on a camping hiking trip, not realizing he had just gotten to the part where Abraham had taken his son Isaac to the top of the mountain. Um, but that whole story to me, you can read that story two ways. And if your listeners don't know, it's a story about Abraham taking his son Isaac to the top of the mountain to sacrifice him, and um, it's a whole story about not loving something more than God. He didn't. Spoiler alert, but if you haven't read the story, he didn't end up sacrificing him. God stopped him and provided a sacrifice for him. It's an amazing story, but you can read that and be horrified thinking about what that trip was up the mountain, uh, or you can laugh like crazy as I did when I first read that story, thinking how awkward was that trip down the mountain with Isaac and Abraham. Like Isaac must have been just like, seriously, Dad, seriously, like just like but yeah, so yeah, there's lots of stuff in the Bible like that. The fact that two of his disciples were called sons of thunder, you know, they were probably fun to have around a campfire. You know, they were just there's a lot of stuff in there like that, and just like little quick stuff. These kids start calling this guy Baldy, and he prays and has bears come and maul them. Like that's comedy gold right there. Like that's
Elijah.
so good. Yeah. You remember the king that the guy stabbed the knife, the sword so far into him, and the king was so fat
Yeah.
that he pushed the sword into his belly and then released it. And they didn't the guards that were guarding the king didn't realize he'd been stabbed because the fat closed
Yeah.
over it. I was like, that's a Jenny Craig, commercial right
Yeah.
there. Like so yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that's just like fascinating but kind of funny too.
Yeah, I think sometimes like reading Jesus's responses to certain people, how blunt he was at times.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a story where this person is asking him to like settle like a family dispute, and he basically says, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? Like, why can't you figure it out yourself?"
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I heard people say that Jesus was a lot sassier than people think he was.
Oh, he definitely was. I'm reading Job like this week, and I'm to the part where his three friends show up, and they are and they're just so off the mark, but they're so passionate about like just slamming Job, and they have no idea what really is going on. And I've read it several times, but after the first time I read it, when I went back to start reading it again, I love it because I'm like, oh, they're going to get a spanking at the end, like they're about to when God shows up. Like so that whole book is pretty funny to me too because they get so personal with the details as they're what they're calling Job and talking to him about it and all this kind of stuff. And then Job's response is spot on of like, how long are you going to keep talking? Like this is enough, and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, that there's a lot of really interesting stuff there.
Yeah. And I think Job specifically, like that's like a perfect example of a book um that you should read to the end, and you shouldn't just quote things willy-nilly, because if or you're just like reading like I don't know, like verse of the day or something, and it's a quote from the book of Job, you might not understand that if it's a quote from one of his friends at the end of the book, God actually says, actually, everything they said was wrong. So, like,
Yeah.
sometimes I would see people quoting from the book of Job, and before like even commenting, I would like go to the chapter to see who's saying it and be like, okay, we shouldn't be quoting this as if it's like a truth about God, because at the end of the book, he
Yeah.
says, yeah,
That's exactly right. You're spot on. In fact, so I do a couple of different like reading through the Bible through a year deal. I really like the chronological. That really helps my mindset of like what was going on in order. But the most popular one, I think, hopefully everybody's done at least once, is a little bit of New Testament, a little bit of Old Testament, and then Psalms and Proverbs, a little bit of those
Right.
every single day. So you kind of work through it all. But Job, if I'm doing that style of reading that year, um, I will actually stop and take a couple of days and just read Job all the way through, because it doesn't need to be broken up. Like it needs to be read through like I'm doing this week. Like I'm going to do, a couple of chapters of Job and then some Psalms and stuff. No, I like that's one that you got to watch through the end.
Yep.
So, I guess so I know that you enjoy hunting. I'm gonna switch gears a bit. Listening to one of your stand-ups with, I think, Chicken of the Tree is what that one was called.
Oh yeah, that's my latest one.
There
Yeah,
you go.
is this just audio? It's not video?
It's just audio. We meant to have our face on here, but it just didn't work out too well. But yeah.
Okay, but can you see me?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can,
yeah, for
yeah, we
sure.
can see.
Okay, so this one, like, I know the listeners won't be able to see this, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
you see
Wow.
all. So the
Big
listeners,
hunter.
they're all looking at 12 and 14 point antlers on. See, if you don't laugh, they'll think it's all true.
I'm
Um,
sorry. I'm sorry. Well, cut
yeah,
it out. Cut it
yeah.
out.
Let's try this again. Listeners, they're listening to no listeners, they're looking at all my 16 to 18 point antlers. You like how I inflated the numbers like a preacher?
There you go.
Yeah, no,
So
we're super into hunting. Oh, and I'm realizing I don't ever look at my background, but yeah, those are my those are my
I
gun
saw
cases
that. I
Oh,
saw that.
over there too. Yeah, I should
That's
probably.
awesome.
Oh, and there's a bobcat. My son got into tanning like hides and selling coyote and raccoon hides, and I got that bobcat 2 years ago, and so he tanned that out. Can you see that on the? This is
Yep,
great. This is great material for a audio podcast, but yeah,
yep.
I got that bobcat in front of my desk.
So you deer hunting, I assume, is what you normally like pursue, or
Yeah, we do deer, dove. We don't really have a good place to go quail hunting. But
yeah.
if you listeners out there have a place, we could be buddies.
Be
But
more
yeah,
than
we hunt.
welcome.
Big thing that we've gotten into lately is there's so many feral hogs here in Texas, and so uh, we got these thermals, these like night vision scopes, and so we go out at night and like track them down, because the state of Texas wants everybody hunting hogs because they spread diseases, they destroy fences, the big ones have these huge tusks and stuff.
Yeah,
I wish this was a video podcast,
I'm
because
sorry.
I
Oh,
got this year.
wow.
So if you think about these tusks coming out of some of these big hogs, listeners, these tusks are about 4 feet long. Um,
they're
That's cool.
mammoth
That's
tusks.
cool to laugh.
they're mammoth tusks, but yeah, they can attack. They'll kill small deer. They tear up the land because they wallow all around. So anyway, they're a huge nuisance, and
Right.
so we've started hunting them at night, and man, it is a blast just to be out there with my boys and sneaking through the woods and trying to find them and all that. So yeah, but mostly deer hunting is kind of our thing.
I've got an uncle that goes in Texas, and I think they call it like the hog. I don't know what they call it. I'm blanking, but they're basically getting like ATVs, and they'll just go through and like start mowing them down and all that fun stuff. So,
Yeah,
but
there
I've
are
heard
people.
of people getting in helicopters and stuff like that too. So it's crazy.
Yeah. So my parents have land out in West Texas, and that's mainly where we hunt until your listeners call me to go quail hunting. And
There you go.
so where I've set my deer stand, actually, over to the left is a county road, and then across that road is a big high fence, and they fly helicopters over there all the time, shooting hogs because they want to keep the hogs out of their high fence ranch. And so Yeah, I've had so many surreal moments like sitting in my deer stand. And a big part of why I love hunting is because I'm traveling all the time. I go super hard all year. And then whenever I hit November, it's kind of my time to just relax, get out in nature, peaceful, quiet, not having to get my rental car, not having to, check in for a flight. Like I literally just shut everything off and I can sit out in nature and be quiet. I carry my little camo Bible with me and, sit out there and read. And several times I'd be out there just like really peaceful. And all of a sudden I hear a helicopter come over and I've looked out my deer stand window and seen those guys like shooting with ARs, shooting hogs across the road
That is
from the
crazy.
helicopter. And I'm like, well, okay, there goes my peaceful
Yeah,
meditation,
I'm out for the
time.
rest of the night, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. When I left my deer stand, I'm like waving my arms. I'm like, I'm trying not to look like a hog.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so I went deer hunting a few times, and for the longest time, I was I only bird hunted quail, pheasant, that type of thing, and so I was like, oh, I'm not even gonna, you know. To me, sitting in a deer stand and waiting for something to approach you from that mindset for a long time, it was just kind of like, oh, this seems. What do you do? You know what I mean? And so finally, I encouraged it. I went with a buddy of mine, and I was like, dude, this is amazing. Like, and then it was a whole different level. And for me, like, I've heard of people like finding, like, being with God present in those moments. And I completely understand that because you're so still that,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's almost like you soak in everything around you. And I was honestly thinking about it today of how fast paced the world is that I wish like a lot of this stuff would slow down so we would take time and actually be present in a lot of things. And I think that's what hunting always reminds me of is like you're forced to move slow,
Mm-hmm.
uh like to like obviously to like capture the animal or whatever that situation is. But to me, like not to get super deep, but it was like so life based in it because I feel like we're constantly moving so fast that we don't really like grasp what is actually happening until it's over or whatever else.
Yeah, and that's my life. Like I've always got the next thing to do.
Yeah.
Like as soon as I'm done with this, I've got to go help my son. He was actually calling me whenever you guys finally popped on 10 minutes late. Do not cut that part out.
Oh,
Leave that
yeah,
part
you
in
called
the
us
Yeah.
out in
yeah.
front of the listeners.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you guys weren't that late. I got a nap, made a sandwich, and then
Did
I
some
grew a
laundry.
beard. Yeah,
Yeah.
grew a beard, shaved it, and then you guys finally got on. But yeah, so I go from thing to thing to thing. I write a book series to focus on the family called The Adventures of Average Boy. We do Average Boy podcasts for families to listen to with their kids together. So I have to write those scripts. I am still writing a Average Boy comedy story for Clubhouse Magazine every month. So I stay slammed all year. We have 5 boys. My wife is incredibly hot. So I stay busy all the time. And so when deer season comes along, it's exactly what you say. I know I'm going to get out to my deer stand or up in a tree or wherever, and I'm just going to sit and I'm going to just be out there. And the only things that are out there are things that God created and
Yeah.
God Himself. And so I can just sit and then I usually just the first couple of times I go I just sit and I just try not to even think. I just relax and I can feel the tension in my body leaving. And then after that, then I really start thinking through things. I use since deer season is November and December. I use that to kind of reflect on the past year and things I want to do better for the year coming up, and just talk to God, like just have moments. And then you hit on the biggest key. Uh, the best thing that I do is I just shut up. Like I don't talk, and I just sit and listen. And it's peaceful. You can just really connect with God just doing that. And I think, especially with phones and things at your fingertips of entertainment and, things to do lists and all that kind of stuff. And Hey, baby. My wife just my wife just came in and distracted me. I know we're winding up. Um, but you can distract me again if you want. Okay. I love that woman. Okay. She's telling me dinner's ready. Uh, but yeah, it's there's so much competing for our mind and our heart. And so it is important to find a way to just be still for a while. Like, and just let our mind reconnect with God. So yeah, for me, that's hunting. Um, I used to run a lot, and running was that way. You know, because I wouldn't listen to music. I would just, you know, go for a jog out in my neighborhood, and you know, that was great. But yeah, I think we all everything's so bombarding for our attention that we really got to find a way to fight that, and you know, and kind of reset. So yeah, wow, we got deep on this. This is
I know.
crazy.
Every once in a while that happens, but
It always happens with Tanner. You
yeah,
should,
I don't know.
when we have breakout groups in our Bible study, Tanner always takes people into one of the office rooms, and sometimes people just come out in full blown tears,
It's
streaming down the face. Like, what are you doing in
it's
there?
not intentional. I just it's all God's work. That's how I feel through it, but it's
Yeah.
crazy. But obviously, I mean, it seems like you have a whole lot of gratitude through your situations of whether like valleys or obviously like I know from listening to that stand up that you did, Chicken of the Tree, like you live in a blended family. So
Mhm.
but like you're super grateful and super humble about your whole experience of like how I think some people could play, as like our pastor would say, you can live in Victimville and build your house in Victimville. You chose to live in Victorville, where you chose to walk in victory, where you were like, like, you know, some people would take these things as disadvantages. You're like, nah, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not who I am. I think
Yeah.
that's super admiring, I guess is a good way of putting that.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I like that. I'd never heard that phrase before, but yeah, live in Victorville, not Victimville. Yeah, it was you know, going through divorce and especially having to deal with betrayal and you know, and from my ex-wife and a really close friend of mine. Yeah, it rocked my world for a while, but then you know, once the dust settled, I was like, okay, well, you know, God's taken me places that I never thought I'd be before, and I'm sure He'll do that again. And he, even if He doesn't, like I still am sold out, and you know, this is my life. And yeah, God took me and my boys, you know, through that valley, and yeah, now I've got a beautiful hot wife coming in telling me dinner's ready. Like it's I yeah, I definitely am living in Victorville right now.
Love
It's
that.
great.
Love that.
Yeah.
We can wrap up. I do have a question. You have Batman symbol tattooed on your arm. So who is your Batman out of all the?
Oh, that's a great question. So, so I grew up in the little town that I lived in. They played the reruns of the '60s Adam West Batman and Robin,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, well, actually, see, this should have been a video deal. One of the first things I bought on eBay was the actual complete series
That's awesome.
of the DVDs. And for you listeners that don't have video, actually, the hosts don't even have video. So I don't even know why I would think the listeners would have video. But yeah, so Adam West is kind of my go-to. I like the campy Batman. I like that, you know, they were like, how did you know, break open the safe in 3 seconds? And he's like, I used a bat 3 second safe detector opener. You know, like I just loved just all the campiness